thank you to all of the people who help us put these events on. This series has been going on for a while now, 3 years, 3 years, I think. It started here at Westwood. It grew out of a workshop that we had called Beyond Land Acknowledgements. And before that, we had several other reconciliation-related activities and events that were done by this congregation, including reading together the recommendations of the Truth, Healing, and Reconciliation Commission and various other things over the years. Some of our members attended the sessions when they were here, when the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was here in Edmonton, and bore witness to that. And so many of these events grew out of that, learning and growing understanding. And we wanted to do something that would invite the community in to be able to come here and be part of that and share this experience and be able to learn more as well as we learn together. I'm feeling a little scattered tonight, and you're just going to have to forgive me because it's been a very, very busy time in my life. We've just moved house, and the moving truck left our house on Thursday, and we're still unpacking, and my brain is still very not quite unpacked. So please bear with me. Thank you. Just to let you know why I'm a little less fluent than I usually am up here at the mic. Anyway, that being said, I'm very happy to be here and to be part of this, and I'm really happy that you are all here. And even though the event is called Beyond Land Acknowledgements, we will indeed start with a land acknowledgement, and I'll ask one of the members of our organizing group, Cassie, to come up and offer the land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Brenda. And yes, this is not a standard land acknowledgement, it is my land acknowledgement. Tawal, welcome. We've called our workshop series Beyond Land Acknowledgement. This is because we wanted to take a deeper look at the relationship between us settlers and the Indigenous people of this land. We seek to honor the historic presence of our predecessors on this land, steeped in ancient history, which is not of our own making. We as settlers acknowledge the commissions and omissions of our ancestors who did not honor the treaty relationship as they should. And we recognize that this caused harm and suffering for Indigenous peoples, which is generational and endures to the present time. We bear witness here that our Treaty Number 6 was intended to stand forever in perpetuity as we seek to inhabit and inherit its legacy for ourselves. Let us work to fulfill its broken promises and correct its injustices for the sake of all our children. As long as the sun shines, the grass grows, and the rivers flow. Hi, hi.
Thank you, Cassie. And now I'm very pleased to introduce our speakers, Luke Wonneck and Brenda Bohmer, who are part of the Treaty Land Sharing Network. And you've probably read about them on the website if you're here tonight or if you're with us on Zoom. So as is our custom at these events, I try to speak as little as possible and allow our guests to share what they would like to share about themselves and about their involvement in their projects. So I will pass it over to you. Who's going first? Luke.
All right, well, thank you so much there, Brenda, and thanks for everyone for being here today. Thanks for Eugene for that beautiful opening prayer and yeah, kind of grounding us in thanks for our food and for the Creator for bringing us here. Yeah. I was really appreciative when you were able to come last minute here. So, Brenda's given me the chance to try using this mic here to see if I can keep it close to my face. But if you guys start not to being able to hear in the back, let me know and I'll go sit down. I kind of like to be able to move around and then look around, I guess. Are we able to bring up that? There we go. Awesome. And can folks see that? I don't know if that sign is in the way of anybody. It is in the way. All right. Well, it's important too, but maybe we find another spot for it. Maybe even here. Or, yeah. There. Perfect. All right. So yeah, Brenda and I are going to be talking about the Treaty Land Sharing Network in this presentation. Maybe we'll just start with both introducing ourselves before we dive into this. So my name is Luke Wonneck. I'm a white settler. My ancestors are mostly or half German and the rest of a different, mostly Northern European countries. And I was born in Winnipeg. I grew up in Calgary and I moved here in 2016, I guess 9 years ago now. And I moved here. I took on a job with an organization called the Agroforestry and Woodlot Extension Society. We do tree planting for farmers, and that was my job before for 4.5 years. I was doing that, helping farmers plant shelter belts, windbreaks, wetland restoration, pollinator habitat, all that sort of stuff. Which is where actually I met Brenda, who's very keen on planting, and she's planted thousands of trees on her land, restoring wetlands on the farm that she calls home, and so we got to know each other through there. But during my time doing my that job, it was a wonderful job. I loved it. It was boots on the ground, getting trees in the ground and everything. But I also kind of started to feel like, oh man, this is good. We're doing this. But meanwhile, I felt like Big Ag was going along, and there was a lot of landscape homogenization. There was clearing and it was a lot cheaper to push down bush and to drain wetlands than it is to plant it. And I kind of wanted to go and understand what's going on here. What's the bigger story of why this continues despite our efforts? And so I went back to school, and I was initially kind of interested in looking at that. Why is wetland drainage and all these sorts of things happening on the land? Why does it continue? And it was when I was in school that I started to read some history. I started to get some really powerful professors, like Lana Whiskeyjack was one. And through my studies, I began to learn about the relationship between agriculture and colonialism here on the prairies. And so that was a really big eye-opening thing for me. And also the ways in which Indigenous people have resisted that and also continue to practice their way of life, which includes farming, but also includes different land-based practices like hunting, picking berries, medicines, and ceremony on the land. And that really was a shocking for me because it really, I'd been doing this work, planting trees on the land, but my only thought in my head was I was doing this for farmers. They were our clients. They were the ones we were planting trees for. We were providing ecosystem services. I hadn't thought about other people on the landscape that, could benefit maybe from those plantations or should be maybe consulted or talked to. So then I kind of, since then I've been sort of in this PhD journey of learning about ongoing access issues for Indigenous people on the land, how they have continued to practice their way of life in these landscapes despite this privatization and some of the challenges they face, and sort of how do we move forward in a better way, which kind of led me to the Treaty Land Sharing Network, and I've been on their coordinating committee since 2021. Sorry, that's not true. I've been involved with them since 2021. I got on their coordinating committee in 2023. I was part of a group that brought them to Alberta. And we kind of formally launched in Alberta in just this past year, but we'll get to that. But maybe I'll just pass it off to Brenda here for her to introduce herself, and then, yeah, maybe we'll get going on more on the Treaty Land Sharing Network.
No, don't turn it off. Okay. Okay, so I can just speak and you're going to hear me? Oh yeah, I hear it going up. Magic. That's really good. Okay, great start there, Luke. Thanks for getting us going. So I want to share a little bit about my personal story and how I became involved with the Treaty Land Sharing Network and provide a farmer's perspective on land sharing. So my farm of 640 acres is located east of Camrose between Bawlf and Iceland. My grandparents immigrated from Norway starting in 1905. And we were talking about this over supper, but when I was growing up, the family farm was a mixed farming operation. We had horses, pigs, chickens, one milk cow, a herd of grazing cow-calf pairs, and we grew grain as well. My mom and dad, Cor and Lil, and my brother Cal, and I were all involved in the ongoing activities and chores related to farming. Just as, you know, a little humor here, as a youngster, I was in charge of the chickens, and I sold eggs for 25 cents a dozen. Wow, eh? Anyway, I wasn't planning on being a farmer when I left home, when I left after high school to pursue post-secondary education and a career working in municipal government. But I was never too far away, so I liked to return home on evenings or weekends to help with the planting and harvest as much as I could. But life changes. I thought my brother was going to take over the farm, but he passed away in an unfortunate accident. And then as my parents got older, they wanted to move to town, start renting out parts of the land. And meanwhile, I'm enjoying my chosen career, but there was always that pull within, should I go back to the farm? So that's what I did. My parents mentored me through the process and of course were really excited and thrilled with my decision. But I was in for a huge challenge. So much to learn, so many decisions, so much equipment to manage and so much to keep up with, but I absolutely loved it. My last year of crop production was 2019, and I now rent out the cropland acres of the farm. And it was really when I started to contemplate my own retirement that my perspective about the land really began to shift. And I knew that, what am I going to do when I retire? I knew that if I sold the land, the bulldozers would soon arrive and remove all the trees in favor of more cropland acres. And that thought really motivated me to move in another direction. The land has provided me with a wonderful life and supported my family for 3 generations. Feeling grateful, I began to look at ways that I could give back to the land. There was a change, and it was a really big change. It felt almost like a radical change, a whole new way of thinking from the mindset of every acre has to count from a crop production perspective. So it's from that perspective to a more holistic approach, wanting to take actions that I thought would improve the farm and the natural areas of the farm. So I went into this with a sense of curiosity, and it opened up a whole new world of possibilities as I connected with other like-minded people and organizations, and like this guy, that's where I met him. And so my attention and energy shifted to a whole set of different activities. I was involved in the 2-year tree planting program and wetland and riparian restoration, trying to hold the water on the land instead of pumping it off, which I had done before, growing a pollinator patch, a food forest, a native plant garden, and a native grassland restoration project. So I was kept busy with quite a bit of that. And these projects, of course, all increase biodiversity, improve the water cycle, enhance wildlife habitat, and so on. You get the idea, the big shift. So all of that caused me to pause and really to say what an absolute privilege it is for me to be a farmer. Most of us farmers were born into this opportunity. We were given the opportunity to farm by our parents or our grandparents. And this is such a huge gift. And it seems like such a lovely story to be able to grow crops and grow food, live and work and make a living on the land. However, when we dig deeper, we realize a very sad part of our history that many of us knew not so much about until recent years. Original peoples were displaced, promises were broken, and so much more. Patty Krawick, in her book, Becoming Kin, talks about a what if. And she said, what if the settlers had pursued relationship and sought kinship with the Indigenous peoples when they arrived? What if? That really makes me think. And yes, it is a what if. However, it's so important to acknowledge the harms and the mistakes of the past, and then hopefully move forward with a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. With these things in mind, it feels very special for me to be part of the Treaty Land Sharing Network. Now I see myself as a steward of the land, a landholder instead of a landowner, a farmer with a love for nature, and now a farmer learning to share land. Sharing land with Indigenous land users is pretty much counterculture in my rural farming community. And these sharing activities do challenge the dominant thinking around property rights. And then there's the usual resistance to any kind of change. So on one hand, this is not easy, and discussions with some family and friends and neighbors can feel uncomfortable. This is to be expected. It's just part of the process. My actions come from the heart, so I know it's the right thing to do. I had my first visit from an Indigenous land user last summer. And in this case, they were looking for sage, sweetgrass, and other plants. And the farm has a fair amount of sage. What a beautiful experience this was for me. To experience the heartfelt power of sharing. It may be a very small step at this point, but it's such an important one. This will take time. And it's an ongoing process of learning, connecting, relationship building, and sharing. So thanks for letting me share that with you. Back to you, Luke, part 2.
All right. Yeah, thanks so much there, Brenda. Yeah, I feel like we've definitely been doing a lot of learning together, both the plants and trees side of things and now this treaty stuff as well. So I'm grateful to be on this journey. Maybe I'll keep calm and stay seated. I liked, yeah, brought us right down and grounded us. So this is good. Okay, so I'm going to talk now. We're moving into what is the Treaty Land Sharing Network. So could I get the next slide, please? So yeah, Treaty Land Sharing Network was started through conversations in 2017, 2018 that started to happen around these three main issues that Indigenous people and I guess the prairies in general, but especially Indigenous people were facing. Ongoing sale of Crown land, so privatization of land. These issues were happening and these pertain to Saskatchewan. Treaty Land Sharing Network was started in Saskatchewan. It has since moved to Alberta, but these issues pertain to here too. Alberta government is also selling off Crown land as well. So that was something. No trespassing signs going up and increasing trespassing legislation. And then also the horrific murder, the killing of Colton Bushy by a farmer, an Indigenous youth, Colton Bushy, who was, and there was Gerald Stanley got acquitted for that killing. And there was a lot of racist backlash towards Indigenous people at that time. I mean, even more so than they already face. And there was a lot of movement towards increasing trespassing legislation, higher fines, more restrictions and stuff like that, even though it was the Indigenous youth that had been killed by this farmer. And that really galvanized, so that galvanized this racist backlash, but it also galvanized a group of farmers and Indigenous people that got together to try to provide a bit of a counter to that narrative and to that tendency that was happening. Yeah, next slide, please. So they started to have these conversations in circles. They started, to go walk the lands together and stuff and try to figure out a different way. And an idea was proposed about a network. Yeah, basically Indigenous peoples, those three things are all making it harder and harder for Indigenous people to practice their way of life on the prairies. The fear of being threatened or worse with violence, no trespassing signs everywhere, and just ongoing privatization. It's just, there's not a lot of places where people can go to pick berries, medicines, hunting, and stuff like that. And so the conversation started to happen about, could we try to do something about this and provide a network where Indigenous people will know that if they go to these lands, at least they won't get, they'll have a safer experience. We can't guarantee it'll be completely safe because we can never do that, but at least we know that these farmers are interested in welcoming rather than threatening or pulling guns on people, which happens. And so, yeah, through those conversations, this idea was kind of born and sort of began to took shape. Yeah, next, perfect. And through those conversations, treaty became a big part of this. This is all before my time, so I've just learned from being on the coordinating committee. But sort of how we began to talk and learn about treaty was treaties were not land surrender contracts. They were about sharing land between nations. And they were sacred and living frameworks to guide this process. Political frameworks, two nations coming together and sharing the land. I just want to mention, this is our this is just my own understanding as we've come and to be able to speak to what treaty is you need way more than a PhD to be able to do anything like that. So I'm just speaking from my own perspective here. What I have learned and what I think the Treaty Land Sharing Network, the settlers at least within it, Indigenous people already knew this, settlers have learned through the process. I also want to mention though, to learn more about treaty, I think one of the most powerful sort of explanations of what it is given in Eugene there, who gave the prayer there. His family was involved in a documentary series called Treaty Talks, Treaty Walks, and Awasasak Our Future, and they're available on the website, Treaty Talks. And there's a really powerful image of what Eugene was talking about earlier about the teachings from the grass, the trees, the animals, and the rocks, and how those come together in ceremony, and how treaty was about honoring those through the pipe ceremony. They were all brought in, and so I want to just highlight that. But what I understood from that documentary and sort of all these other treaty teachings that I've been lucky enough to learn from is it is about an ongoing relationship, a walk together, and learning to share land. I've heard from elders that I've talked to about there was an agreement to share the land to the depth of the plow. That was what the Indigenous people understood that they were that settlers, my people, needed was places to farm, and so yeah. Anyways, so that was kind of that, and it involves rights and responsibilities for all parties. And so, yeah, we talk often about Indigenous or First Nations treaty rights, which is very important and everything like that. But we have to remember that the only reason that we are here is because it was agreed to in the treaties. That was our right and responsibility to be here. If we follow and uphold that relationship. So that's a privilege and a right that Indigenous people have gifted to us, and we can't forget that. And then the other thing was that the treaty, the numbered treaties, which I guess I feel like maybe most of you may have a background a bit in the late or in the 1870s. They were negotiated between the British Crown and various First Nations across the prairies and into the Northwest Territories too. Those are only maybe the most recent treaties you could say on these lands. There's many treaties before that between Indigenous nations, between Indigenous nations and the land and the other non-human nations as well that need to be honored and respected too. But all these sorts of things I think are in that documentary, they do a really good job of explaining. So these are kind of some of the learnings around treaty we began to recognize. Next slide, please. And I also want to give Michelle Brass here and some farmers in the network a chance to explain a bit more what came out of those learnings. So maybe I'll let, if you just want to play that video.
It's really important for Indigenous peoples to be connected to the land because it's how we revitalize our language. It's how we increase our health and wellness. It is vital to our survival. The problem is that many government policies have restricted our use of these lands, have made an Indigenous way of life almost criminal. There are no trespassing laws. We have lands being privatized and sold off. And we can see from recent years that it's going in the opposite direction of land sharing, treaty land sharing, reconciliation, all of these areas. What the Treaty Land Sharing Network does is that it's not waiting for government policy, it's individuals.
We too are treaty people, and we have responsibility to fulfill the treaty obligations. The key obligations are clearly government, and it's our job to hold our governments to account. But it's also key that we as citizens, individuals, and particularly we who are great beneficiaries of the treaties, which is us farmers, that get to use this land, get to produce food on this land, get to live here, that we also weigh in and try to be responsible and fulfill our aspects of the treaty relationship.
Indigenous peoples have a restricted access to land that continues to dwindle because of government policy. Land title holders are addressing that by opening up their land for Indigenous land users and not waiting for government policy to change, but instead taking action where they can today, right now.
It's not just an obligation, it's also an honor to be part of this.
Yeah, I just wanted to play that video first to give Michelle a chance. Michelle is also on our coordinating committee as well to sort of share about some of the challenges Indigenous people are facing. As we've already talked, I talked about that a bit ago. And then also, what Nettie, the farmer there, talked about was how it's, we need to hold government into account, but we also, if government's not moving, we got to do something to make that happen, which is where the Treaty Land Sharing Network was starting from. So I just go to the next slide, which is also a video, kind of along the same lines and more getting into what what the ethos of what we're.
The Treaty Land Sharing Network is a network of people who've come together of land title holders and Indigenous land users to share and use the land collectively.
The more we learned about treaties, too, the more obvious it was that the original intention was to share the land. Somebody wants to take deadwood out of pasture, that's great. And we have native plants on pasture. We have wild animals that Indigenous people hunt, and we don't. From my point of view, that's nothing but positive.
It's a necessary part of the project of farming is understanding that you're part of a web of relations. The microbiome is actually what does all the growing. We share with all the other species. We share with our neighbors. That's one of the things about rural communities that's appealing.
We're hopeful that in our neighborhood and in neighborhoods across Saskatchewan, settler people will recognize themselves as part of this relationship, not as owners of the land, but as users of the land which can be shared. It's a real opening to learn more, to understand more deeply who we are and where we are and what's all around us.
Yeah, I really love Will. He's the son, and Michelle's as well. But Will's perspective on farming is about sharing the land. If you think about it, we have to share with all the other species already. And I'd kind of understood that a bit with my background, but rooting it in treaty is critical. I've come to realize. Next slide. Okay, yeah, no worries. I guess what came out of this was the Treaty Land Sharing Network, which basically was about recognizing that Indigenous people, I think the next slide is just our principles, which is recognizing that Indigenous people hold treaty and inherent rights to access the land freely where they, to practice their way of life. And that settlers have this ongoing responsibility to actively remove barriers to access to sharing the land, but also to engage in ongoing learning through the process. And so that's a big part of our work as well. But maybe I'll leave it at that rather than reading through all of our principles and get Brenda, maybe I think you're next to talk more about how it actually works.
Okay. Next.
No, actually, I jumped the gun here. I forgot. I just wanted to mention in 2021 was when we formally launched in Saskatchewan. This was on a farm in Bladworth, Saskatchewan, not too far from Regina. There was a pipe ceremony led by Elder Ross Gardepy, and basically that was when the network was launched formally. It was just back in 2021. Sorry, go to that next slide. Next slide there. Yeah, so Mary Smiley and Ian McGurry there were the farmers who steward that land there, and that was where the first Treaty Land Sharing Network sign was raised. But yeah, I'll give it to you. I think.
Next slide, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the Treaty Land Sharing Network is a group of farmers and Indigenous people coming together to share land. It's the simple explanation, but now some nuts and bolts on how it works practically. So if you're a landholder who wants to share land, there's an application and intake process form to fill out. You provide your site location, description, and you have to talk to your neighbors because safety is very important to make sure they're aware of what's going on. And so then what happens from there, the land location and description are entered into our database. And we provide a signage for you to post, which functions for a couple of reasons, or it's helpful to increase awareness as people drive by on the road and in the neighborhood, and also to help users confirm they're at the right spot when they come to use the land. Next slide, please. Yeah, okay, so then if you're an Indigenous land user who wants to use land, you would go to our website, Treaty Land Sharing website, enter a portal, which you open, that's a map like this, and it flags all of the sites in the network. And you can basically click on a flag and then get the location, contact information, and a site description. And like on the slide, there's you can narrow the search depending on whether you're looking for berries or hunting or native plants and so on. So then, yeah, it can narrow the search down. The next slide, please. Yeah, so there are land protocols. Land users phone ahead before their initial visit to get the location details along with everything about the site regarding safety. And the land can be accessed for gathering plants, medicines, rocks, hunting, ceremony, and additional uses can be discussed with landholders. It's foot-only access unless other arrangements are made, and gates and fences must be left as they are found. No open fires unless both parties agree to that. Next slide. Yeah, so the program started in Saskatchewan, as Luke said, and I know Luke was very much part of the TLSN Alberta working group that carried out a pilot program first in 22 and 23. And there was a positive response to expand the program into Treaty 6 on this, in Alberta. Next slide. Yeah, so this is a picture of actually at my farm, my farmyard, where we hosted the launch of the Treaty Land Sharing Network last July 6th, and we have somebody that was actually there. Yes, yeah. Rain. Neat. Anyway, so that gathering, as you can see, we raised the flag in a flag raising ceremony. We had ceremony, farmers, Indigenous people, a meal, presentations, and a walk to put up the first sign on my farm. So it was an absolute pleasure for me to host that event, for sure. Special moment. Next slide. Yeah, so this is quite amazing, really, when I think of it, that there's already 70 locations and over 45,000 acres in Treaty 4 and Treaty 6. And of course, most of those are on the Saskatchewan side, because we're just getting growing in Alberta here. But yeah, 3/4 of the locations were accessed in the past year, multiple times, most of them as well. And the experiences have been overwhelmingly positive. So we're really happy to report that, and it's good news.
Thanks for that, Brenda. And that last bit there was, we do a survey of landholders in the network every year, and that was what they reported, because the access and stuff like that. As well, we involved in advocacy, so trying to influence government policy on crown land sales and trespassing legislation. So we've been actively trying to involve in that and partnering with other Indigenous organizations as well. Next slide, please. And so I just wanted, we were talking, the title of this is called Learning to Share Land, and some of the ongoing learnings, I think, at least myself, and I'd hazard a guess to say, especially the settlers in the organization, are learning amount of racism Indigenous people face when trying to practice their way of life is like an early event that happened. There was a car of Indigenous people going to a location and a car of settlers, and the one Indigenous people got kind of stopped by a farmer and asked where they were going and stuff like that. That was an example of it. In my own research as well, I've talked to many people, Indigenous people, who've had guns pulled on them, who've been talked to or like accosted. I mean, very scary stories. There's a lot of fear for Indigenous people to access in rural landscapes, and it's very legitimate. A lot of hostility that they face. And so, it's been very powerful for me to learn that. Like it's completely changed my perspective of, some of the privileges I have when going through those kinds of spaces. Not quite. Another learning that we have is balancing relationships versus access. So kind of in those discussions early on and kind of ongoing, we recognize that relationships are really critical for building trust and access and everything like that to access land, and relationships can really lead to powerful things in terms of learning about each other's different worlds and everything. But we also don't want Indigenous people to have to go and sit down and drink tea with every farmer that they go access. This is about access to land. That should be their inherent right. And so we are trying to make it so that we make sure that we communicate to our members that we can't expect those kind of relationships that Indigenous people will want to have tea or to do anything more than practice their life way. And if they do, that's great too. And a lot of Indigenous people actually want to get to know the farmers in the network just for them to trust where they're going as well. It varies quite a bit, but we want to make sure that access is important first and foremost, and that landholders are taking that step in not requiring any sort of relationship building or for them to vet. That initial phone call before their first visit is just about safety. It's not about permission. They've by being part of this network, they're welcoming Indigenous access. And then the third part is distinguishing safety from control. So this being part of this network, I think, requires farmers to relinquish control over vetting who comes onto their land, and one of the big things that we wanted to make sure is that people who are participating in the network are welcoming all forms of Indigenous ways of life, picking berries, medicines, ceremony, and also hunting. So there's some questions sometimes around hunting, for various reasons. But at the same time, we want to make sure that people are safe as well in the land. And so there's a balancing act there. And so we do have, if there's an explicitly a member that wants to be part of the network, but maybe has land that's not suitable for hunting because they have like a children's camp on there or something like that, like it's a very special, then we'll accept them, and then they can, maybe at certain times of the year they wouldn't have hunting. But we really try to make it so that it's as open for various uses as possible, and we're not picking and choosing treaty rights. So that's kind of a balancing act we try to find as well. Next slide. This is our coordinating committee. It's about half and half Indigenous and non-Indigenous here, and our knowledge keeper, Shirley Wolf Keller from Treaty 4. She opens all our meetings in prayer, and so we're very grateful for her guidance through this all. Next slide. We also have an Indigenous advisory circle we established. We've always had Indigenous leadership. Obviously, our coordinating committee is about half and half, and in other ways through ceremony, we've always had it. But we've kind of formalized it recently into this circle. Pictures here, and of course, there's three white. We were there at the same meeting, and I don't know. We should have gotten a picture with just the Indigenous advisory circle, but a group of various Indigenous people from various nations and context, urban and reserve-based, and to help us navigate those kind of ongoing learnings and other issues that we face. These are challenges, and we're trying to figure it out as we go. Next slide. So, and getting involved, the treatylandsharingnetwork.ca, that's a website to find if you're Indigenous or no Indigenous people. There's the portal there. You can access land. You can share land if you are or know landholders in the network through a different part of that same website. Next slide. Of course, if you don't have land, there's also donation. We definitely use funding. And then, of course, staying up to date with our ongoings through our mailing list. Next slide. We have this upcoming webinar, Demystifying Indigenous Hunting, with some Indigenous hunters and a TLSN landholder on the panel discussion. This is coming up on April 1st. Again, a lot of people have fears or stereotypes about Indigenous hunters, and they're not subject to the same laws, and so like how do they? There's just a lot of misconceptions and things like that. So we're trying to address those and proactively and have hunters on there to share about their reality and the world that they have to navigate through, and to sort of challenge some of those stereotypes as well. That's coming up. Next slide. I think that's everything. That's just our contact information there. So that's all we had in terms of presentation, but would welcome any questions you guys have.
We're going to pass around the mic.
Thanks. That was a great presentation. Right towards the end there, that's what my question is about. So there's sort of hunting season for settlers, and then Indigenous people can hunt year-round on the land? That's the way it works, yeah?
Yeah.
That's what I was
just,
saying,
it would be the same as if they went to Crown land, yeah, but those are they're able to hunt it all seasons, yeah.
Okay. So yeah, you just alluded to a little bit of a question I had. So Crown land, they can hunt anytime?
Yeah.
Okay, so how has your success been in approaching the Crown land when they want to sell it? And is it harder in Saskatchewan to prevent selling the Crown land, or Alberta, or how is your success there?
Oof. I mean, it's the Alberta Wilderness Association has a really useful graph. They showed the Crown land sales per year for the last few decades. We submitted a letter, and it's an ongoing, and there's folks like them are also trying to fight this sort of thing, but it's happening at the policy level. So I think Crown land sales are continuing in both provinces. It varies year to year. Like there was some big sales in northern Alberta, Mackenzie County over the last few decades. There's been some really big sales there, but then here and there they'll sell off land. I know in Saskatchewan a big issue was there was the federal pastures. So I don't know if the community pastures, and then they were downloaded from the federal government to the province, and then Saskatchewan government was selling off a bunch of, and they did. They sold off some, but we were trying to fight against that. What difference our letter and our advocacy makes is, I don't think we didn't focus on I don't think we focused on a single one thing and try to stop it. It was more of like a general policy that's happening all over. Yeah. Good question though, yeah.
Do we have any Zoom participants who have questions? Have they put any in the chat? If you've joined us on Zoom and you have a question you'd like to put it in the chat, we'll be happy to have them read out for you. Okay, just let me know. Okay, anyone else?
Yeah, so it's moved into Alberta from Saskatchewan. Is it moving east, or like is this idea kind of catching on across Canada, or where is it moving next?
I think it definitely could, and we've often get inquiries from other jurisdictions. So right now it's just in the Treaty 6 part of Alberta, and until we have a solid base of landholders and Indigenous people that are willing to work together in other places, I feel like that's critical. They have the local relationships that matter. And so, yeah, we've just expanded this past year into western half of Treaty 6, and there's no immediate plans to expand, although, yeah, there may be other groups that try to take on similar things. Like there's a group in Vancouver Island, which they have the Douglas treaties there and stuff, and there was interest in this sort of thing there too. And where that is at right now, I'm not sure, but as of right now, we have no immediate plans, but it's totally possible, yeah.
With the sale of community lands, aren't you getting support from local farmers who would want to be against the government selling off those lands? I thought those lands were important to farmers, to the settler farmers.
It's a good question. Yeah, I don't know if anybody, would you know anything more about that's a situation in Saskatchewan? I guess it's I think, there's the farmers, or the ranchers that would have used it for grazing their cattle.
And I would think they could be allies in this.
Well, they're probably less cattle raised nowadays.
That's true too.
Part of it, so there's not such great need.
Yeah, it's become more farming around, but I think you're right, and I think farmers have organized, like the ones that, like there's Nature Saskatchewan, there's different farming the National Farmers Union has advocated about this as well. So we definitely do try to work with both Indigenous groups and settler groups when we can. But yeah, you're right. There would be farmers that would be against that kind of thing from happening. Yeah.
Are you soliciting membership from the farming community, or is it word of mouth and just hoping that that somebody thinks this is a good idea, so I'll sign up.
Well, yes, of course, we are looking for new members, and one of the things that we're doing is like coming around to places like this to spread the word. There's an awareness thing. So it's a grassroots organization, so our resources, we're just working on this as a group of volunteers, trying to get the word around. I think it also feels like the people that first hear about it, I think they have to process it and probably hear it a couple of times before maybe they'll, like, it's such a big shift in the thinking from a farmer's point of view that I think it takes a while. I think it's going to be a slow process, just my opinion. From the farmer's perspective, like in my neighborhood, it's pretty tough going. I mean, and I'm not here, I'm not saying, I'm trying to really push the program. I'm more or less maybe leading by example and trying to share what I'm doing and how important it is to me, hoping that it'll change some thoughts in some other folks.
So your neighbors haven't signed up yet?
No, I sure wish they would, but no, it doesn't work quite like that.
You kind of addressed my question a little bit in what you just said, but talk a little bit about the kind of resistance that you get. I think it must be a really hard sell in Alberta or maybe on the prairies to even shift from being a landowner to a landholder. Those are very different terms.
Thanks for that question. And it's, you're kind of choking me up almost because it has been such a shift for me personally. And I'm just hoping others can make similar changes. But yeah, I guess from my perspective, I'm really, like when I was a kid, there were no Indigenous people around. There was nothing in school. There were no curriculum classes on what happened in our history. I never even saw any Indigenous people. And I had no clue about what was going on or what had happened. And yeah, then when I learned about this in my adult life, or recently actually, in the last 3-4 years, about what happened to the land, and you just feel kind of like, what have I been doing that I'm just operating in a bubble. And so it just like kind of burst the bubble, and wow, so I want to learn as much as I can about all of this, the history, like you folks are here tonight because you want to learn. It's the same with me. But I guess there's kind of a guilt. I said in my presentation that the land was a gift to me, basically, and I said that, my grandparents and my parents, that it becomes a gift from the Indigenous people. And it wasn't like, I don't know what the terminology would be, but the whole issue of stolen land, so as a landholder, there's underlying guilt and there's, all of those types of things. But yeah, and it does, so bringing it forward to my neighbors and the community and whatnot, I just have to accept that, this is just where I'm at, and I have to be happy that we're comfortable with what I'm doing. And yeah, and if somebody wants to talk to me or, that's great, but it is hard to approach people that sort of, I guess the attitude would be, okay, Brenda, you can do that on your land, but I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. That's the kind of attitude.
Do they get mad at you?
No, not really. You can do what you want, Brenda. That's fine. So I'm just using that example. But it's so disappointing. But I still have hope that even though, those are important conversations, because maybe 3 years from now, that same person might, that's not the dumbest, they're going to learn something, or, they'll hear about this in another way. So I have a lot of hope that way, and all I can do is, doing and trying to help out with the big picture as well from a farmer's perspective. But I'm just trying to be an example, and this is really important to me, because what if the land is given to me, and I'm fully in respect of the Indigenous people that, I just feel terrible, of course, just like everybody else, that this has happened, and I'm a beneficiary. So it's kind of I don't know. I don't know if I explained that well, but that's the situation. Luke, do you have other insights on that?
Just to say that I have so much respect for Brenda. She's so brave in all these kind of conversations with her neighbors and talking. I think, maybe they haven't been outwardly aggressive or anything like that, or angry, but there's a lot of bravery that goes into having conversations with neighbors that will just shut her down or not respond to her calls or something about it. It's a big thing. So
Thanks. We had another question over here, and then I'll come back to you.
I'm kind of a recent immigrant to Canada too, and coming from Germany, and there is a lot of memorials and things in Germany and history classes about the Holocaust. And I think, like in Canada, it's kind of a bit of a Holocaust too. But I think, like a lot of people, young people even today, and even my wife is Canadian, they don't know much about the settler First Nation relationship. They don't know anything what actually treaty means, what kind of happened at the times, 150 years ago, 200 years ago. And do you think, what is your opinion do you think there should be more of this historical teaching in the curriculums? And I took a university post-Federation Canadian history course, and even there I learned very little about treaties and what it really meant and what it is like. So I find to improve the relationship, we all have to understand what it actually is and what happened, and because a lot of people have also the feeling like land ownership is kind of a very Canadian right. And so what do you think about that?
Well, I'll start and then Luke can over to you. But I would say, of course, yes, absolutely in schools. That's part of our history. That's paramount. So you hit the nail on the head. But then, again, and there is starting to be, even at the Bawlf school, there is curriculum now. Checked it out. So I was quite relieved. And so there is some attention being given to it. So again, I think we have to have hope. But you're right on. I agree.
Yes.
Sorry, if I can just add. Wait, Margaret.
So regarding your question about what kids are learning in schools nowadays, I'm an educator, and I would say in the last 10 to 15 years, kids have been learning a lot. So it's the younger generation, I would think about 25 years and younger, who have been exposed to a lot of, the problems that were caused and what it means to be a treaty person. Like even in schools nowadays, the land recognition is read out every day. It's posted in the schools on the walls. And it's often up to individual teachers also to put a lot of emphasis on learning about what's happened in the past. So I think the younger generations get it. So, yeah.
Okay, you had-
Yeah, I so understand the whole thing with the mindset. I come from rural Saskatchewan and 2 generations back from farming. The question I have, and which it didn't occur to me before, but so there's the medicinal picking, the berries, and hunting. Can a landowner choose to be part of this land sharing and only allow medicine picking and berry picking rather than hunting?
No, unless there's a very specific safety concern, like with the kids camps or whatever for hunting. So yeah, we want, we had that in those initial discussions. We were not picking and choosing treaty rights. It's like, and it's because we want Indigenous people to be able to access land and know that, or when they go to these sites, it's not like there's multiple tiers of membership and stuff like that. We want to make it as straightforward as possible for Indigenous people. There's, unless there's a specific safety concern, it would be allowing everything. Now, of course, Indigenous people, I mean, first of all, they're subject to this same laws around like hunting safety, for example. Like Indigenous people can't shoot towards a building like any hunter as well. And so, just because, so there may be some lands that if you have like buildings around, they may not be appropriate for hunting, but that, or maybe only in certain parts of it or something like that. But generally, if you're joining the TLSN, you're welcoming all forms of access. Yeah.
I have a question for you. So the farmers are vetted and go through some sort of a vetting process to become part of the treaty land sharing network. How does it work for the Indigenous folk? Judith, she would use the term pretendian. Like, is there something to prevent fake Indigenous people, so to speak, to go hunting?
Yeah, it's a good question. Okay, so just to clarify, with the landholder side of things, it's vetting it's an intake form, and they have to fill their description of the land, and then they have to agree to these principles, and then they submit. And so it's not like we have a panel and But for the Indigenous, we made the conscious choice. We didn't ask people to provide their Indian number, registration number, or anything like that. We don't want Indigenous people have to fill out already so much paperwork to practice their way of life, to do their stuff. They have to go through so many bureaucratic loopholes that we didn't want to be another one. So we tried to make it as low barrier as possible, and also recognizing that there's Indigenous people that have never were granted status for various colonial reasons. Assiniboine, Winawak, and Grand Cache area, they're an example of a group that are Indigenous to this land, but don't have Indian status. Anyways, so but the issue with pretendians, it's possible, we don't. Sorry?
It's not an issue.
We haven't run into it, no. And maybe because we're small and we really sort of talk about this stuff with farmer audiences, and we go out to nations and talk to, or we're trying to, I don't know. But it hasn't been an issue that we're aware of. It hasn't been brought up. Yeah. But it's something to keep in mind as we grow. Yeah.
We have a question from our Zoom audience. Can you speak to the benefits of the tree planting and wetland restoration and how that might integrate with more Indigenous knowledge and practices on the land?
Great question.
Yeah, okay, so interesting. Yeah, that's, again, what's our relationship with the land? And I can speak to that where, when I came back to take over the farms, the family farm, I was very focused on trying to make this work. the production part of it, the money involved in the machinery and getting enough crop to pay for the ongoing operation of you're just totally consumed by that production role. And like I said, when I thought about my own retirement, that everything shifted, and I realized how much the land, like there was this relationship with land. And, I started to evaluate, what am I pumping the water off the land for? My parents, grandparents, everybody is nature or was nature oriented, but still we had to make a living with the crops. And so the shift came, and just automatically you're looking at how can I improve. To me, improving the farm and the land involves building the relationship with nature, right? And so just anything that I could do in terms of, I just had to, I set out on a mission I can make this, my dad, I remember before he passed away, was, this is really something special that you're doing, because you're kind of looking beyond the farming part of it and expanding on the natural areas and how that could help wildlife and the environment. That's all good things. And then how nicely that then leads into my relationship, like with the land and the peoples that have come before, and for me to grow and to try and share this space with Indigenous people. Like it just all fits together. And I don't, in terms of native plants, I'm trying to learn all about that. And I know like this much, and I know that Indigenous people know, massive amounts. And it's all about learning. But everything seems to kind of flow together, everything's integrated, and we need, as farmers, to realize that it's not just about the cropland acres. This isn't going to work in the long run if we don't have, keep fence lines in the existing trees that we have. And around me, there's people that have sold their land and to somebody who's come in, and they just bulldoze everything down, and it's just I'm devastated, and so that really motivated me. I don't even know if I answered the question, but did I answer?
Maybe, or can I?
Yeah.
Can I build on that too? Yeah. Because that's something that. So like I think that's maybe where we're hoping to get to is thinking about shared stewardship. This network is about access right now, and that's a first step maybe, in getting people onto the land is really important. But in the end, sort of thinking about what does it mean for Indigenous people to have a say in what actually happens on the land. They're not just accessing this land that the farmer is in charge of. And I think that can happen in many different ways. Something I'm excited about, is if, the kinds of projects that I was doing, could we do those on network lands and have the Indigenous people that have been accessing, start to, what do they want to see on the land, and what would be important to them to look for and everything. That would be start. And then there's maybe different models of maybe getting more into like land rematriation, land back, or stuff like that, where Indigenous-led land trusts, or things like that, where Indigenous people are having a more a say more that is more formally entrenched in law, in colonial law, than the Treaty Land Sharing Network is. The Treaty Land Sharing Network is voluntary, and farmers can I guess leave without any repercussions from colonial law, I guess, which is fine, and it's an important. A thing to have that option and to kind of show how land sharing is possible, I guess. But it's important to start also thinking about stewardship of land in the long term. And I think that already happens kind of organically with the network, like talking to farmers who are part of this network. Like an Indigenous person will come onto Land and Elder, and they'll name 30 plants that they hadn't seen before, and then they'll talk about how they never saw their land in that same, or that was just like a part of the back 40 that they never even went to, you know, and it's just like, suddenly they see that land with different eyes, and then, you know, there's hard to correlate whether that actually leads to a management practice change on a large scale or anything like that, but I think it does something. Yeah, so.
Any more questions? Then I would like to thank both of you very, very much for being here tonight and sharing this important story with us. It's, Lindsay, you have something just.
Hi, I don't have a question. I just have a comment so that people that aren't members of Westwood know about it. All the flower gardens on Westwood's property are in native plants. And I grow vegetables for the food bank, and there's another community member who grows, and some of it goes to the food bank and some of it goes to her friends and family, but she shares a lot of it. And so I think the church members are very supportive of this initiative that I kind of decided on. And it's been a learning process too about native plants and what works and what doesn't and that kind of thing. So it's been a fun experience.
Thank you. Yes, so as I was saying, thank you so much for coming out. And this is part of an ongoing series, as I mentioned at the beginning. And we are a small group. Westwood itself is a small group, but always happy to welcome new folks here. And our little committee, our little group that organizes this event is also always very happy to get fresh input from anyone who would like to help with the organization of it, with the setup of it, with suggestions for future speakers. We certainly welcome all of those things. Now, we did change one thing in the registration process this time. If you registered through Eventbrite, we did ask for a $5 registration donation because we want to make this accessible to everybody. And in the past, we haven't asked for anything. We've just gone on a goodwill thing of hoping people would show up. Unfortunately, a lot of people see free events on Eventbrite and they register for them and they don't feel any responsibility of following through or taking their name off if they're not coming. And because we're serving food, that's the main reason we ask you to register in advance, is we want to make sure we have enough for everyone, and we don't want to have too much, and we want there to be spaces for the people who actually show up, because we don't have infinite space here. So for all of those reasons, we ask you to register, and we did ask people to put in $5 just to deter the people who just register because it's free, and then they don't feel they cannot come. That being said, we do always appreciate donations to help, because $5 obviously doesn't cover the costs of running this place or even the event. But absolutely, it is only, I guess it's following the spirit of the Buddhist way of, if you found value in the teaching, then we would appreciate a donation for that. And there is a donation box by the door on your way out. If your donations are identified, this is a charitable organization, so if you identify your donation with your name and an email address or an address that we can send you a tax receipt, we will do that, right? So that being said, thank you again so much. And many hands make light work, so if you wouldn't mind, I think we'll have some bins that will magically appear from the basement so that dishes can be put in them to be taken back downstairs, and the tables get put away, and chairs get put away, and all that kind of stuff. Thank you. Okay. There's Trace.